Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Misfits podcast. My name is Brandon.
And I'm Cody.
And welcome to another doozy of an episode. How are you feeling after the last one?
I mean, I feel like it could potentially get worse.
Yeah, there are three things that are inevitable in life: death, taxes, and ancient aliens just getting so weird.
Are we talking Austin weird, Portland weird? What levels of weird are we talking about here?
I'll let you be the judge of that because you've been to one of those two places.
Yes, that would be a fine judge. For I am the weird.
So for this episode, it gets weirder. Season 2, episode 2 is titled Gods and Aliens. And as the title says, I'm sure both you and I can guess the main thesis of this whole episode, which is, what if all the gods that we talk about in the various religions that have existed throughout history were actually alien?
I mean, we talked in the last episode about, I believe you had made the comment that we skipped season 1 because it's just going to repeat throughout the rest of the series, and already we are repeating ourselves because I'm pretty sure we talked about that last episode.
We did, but this episode will go into more. I'm not sure if detail is the right word for it, but
As much detail as there is on Ancient Aliens.
yes, yeah, you were. Yeah, that's right. So let's, in this clip, listen to the main thesis of the show.
Zeus, Surya, Thor. For thousands of years, ancient myths have described gods who came down from the heavens.
Always you have someone who is descending from the sky with loud noise, with thundering, with fire, with smoke.
They would have come from the most powerful and magical place possible, from the stars.
But just who were these mystical beings that ruled the skies with supernatural powers?
You could wonder if these tales of Zeus's thunderbolts, Thor's hammer, if these weren't real weapons.
Did our ancient ancestors create the gods from their own imaginations? Or did they simply report events they believed to be true?
Our ancestors misinterpreted extraterrestrials as gods because that was the only way that they could explain away what they witnessed.
So I don't want to jump to conclusions, but something Zeus getting jiggy with a whole bunch of people as animals equals aliens?
Man, we will talk about that. So, like, this is bread and butter stuff for ancient alien theory. Gods, as they are described in various religions and mythologies throughout time and throughout the world, are actually aliens. And the various powers of those aliens are just misinterpreted technologies. These aliens were then worshipped as gods by various ancient peoples around the world. I mean, it's kind of weird how every culture is influenced by, again, magic sky daddies. Yet there's no record of an actual alien having been present in any, like, gravesite, temple, anything. Like, we don't have any actual physical evidence of these beings.
Well, as far as we know, they vibrated, fell through the molecules of the Earth's crust down to the core, and were incinerated. And I don't know if I'm jumping a gun here, but I don't know that I would necessarily want to call them sky daddies, but I'm getting weird kind of vibes with that last statement, with defining technology as magic or these other people as godlike beings, because I'm getting real flashbacks to the conquistadors. I could be misremembering. I could be misremembering something, but I feel like maybe not conquistadors specifically, but something about.
Yeah, I don't remember if like there was any like actual evidence to support that they believed that they were gods. I'm pretty sure that was a massive like colonial and like Western interpretation of events, but I'm not 110% sure about that. It wouldn't be surprised to see that colonial powers at the time were essentially hyping up their prowess, like these indigenous peoples like revered these conquering like empires as gods, like, you know what I mean?
Right. Once again, I could also be remembering the documentary The Road to El Dorado.
And again, we will not sing any of the songs because copyright. So in an attempt to sound credible as much as this show can, the show brings up Heinrich Schliemann and his discovery of the fabled city of Troy.
In 1868, amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann set out to find what he believed was the city that served as the basis for the Trojan War, as described in one of the greatest pieces of classical literature, Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. Written in the 8th century BC, Homer's Iliad tells the tale of a great war, born of feuding and jealous gods. While most scholars believe the story of the Trojan War was a work of fiction, Schliemann was determined to prove the myth was a reality.
So you see what they're trying to do here, right? They're trying to say, well, this guy who grabbed his copy of the Iliad and went over to Turkey and found the lost city of Troy. If he was able to find that city based off this old book, how true are the other religious texts in the world?
I mean, call me skeptical.
That's a healthy attitude to have.
I'm just saying, once a coincidence, you kind of need more of a pattern in order to
Right.
be convincing with that, because otherwise it's just speculation.
Not on the Ancient Aliens show.
Nope. And Ancient Aliens is just another night at the office.
So in this next clip, we sort of get to the idea of what the show is trying to say about specifically the Iliad, but about all different like religions around the world.
When you look at many of the mythologies around the world, they have these stories of gods coming down from the sky.
There's a beautiful description of the way that the gods move, like when they kind of come down to the earth. You get this sense of them gliding down, but the way that they move is kind of beyond time. It just kind of happens.
If the ancient Greeks invented the stories of gods as a primitive attempt to explain their universe, how can we account for similar deities found in widely different regions and cultures around the globe?
Yeah, man, they move beyond time, bro. God, sounds like an episode of fucking Joe Rogan.
Yes, this one specific instance shows this thing, and that means that all of them show this thing.
Exactly. So let's actually talk about Heinrich Schliemann and what he did. So he did indeed grab a copy of the Iliad and followed it until he found what he believed to be the city of Troy, right where the book said it was. But as always, the story is more complicated. First, Schliemann had no formal education in archaeology. To be fair, not many did in the 1870s. So because of this, Schliemann dug a whole trench that, according to Professor C. Brian Rose, who teaches classical studies at the University of Pennsylvania, destroyed a phenomenal amount of material. What he did find was 10 different cities across 4,500 years of history.
So what I'm getting is, in the show, they're portraying it as he read the Iliad and went to an exact spot, whereas in reality, he kind of got it wrong a couple of times before eventually kind of finding it.
Yeah. Well, like, he did find a city there, but like, it wasn't the Troy that we all see Brad Pitt in. You know what I mean? Another of Schliemann's controversies start with the discovery of Priam's treasure. Priam is the king of Troy and the father of Hector and Paris. Hector's the guy who gets killed by Achilles. The Iliad, I recommend reading it if you're interested in classics. This included a large amount of gold jewelry and bronze vessels. He stated that this treasure was of the fabled king with very little evidence and was done more to try to link any discovery he made with the Homeric Troy rather than any actual evidence to back up his claim.
Like what a responsible person of science and archaeology would do.
Exactly. D.F. Easton, in his essay Heinrich Schliemann, Hero or Fraud, goes into greater detail. Easton states that Schliemann was not very good at separating fact from fiction. He connected a building inside the gate as Priam's palace and the city as the, oh boy, I'm going to mispronounce this one, the Scaean gate, the Saian gate?
Was it over 9,000?
Considering he was the king of the Homeric Troy, I would say over 9,000.
So the Saiyan's power was over 9,000.
So there's more to the story too. Like the Turkish government actually eventually rescinded his excavation permit and sued him for the Priam's treasure because he started his digging before he was ever given approval. He also smuggled that treasure under the nose of the Turkish government, which you might know as stealing and a very like English move, if you ask me.
But is it stealing if it belongs in a museum? I think that's how that works, right? I've watched Indiana Jones.
So I've been to the London Museum and I looked at it and went, wow, this is a lot of shit you've stolen. And later archaeological work at the site would make it clear that any feasible background for the story of the Iliad would have happened at least 1,000 years later than the Troy that was discovered by Schliemann.
So you're saying it was Troy and not a completely different set of relics?
I think the scientific answer would be fuck it, maybe. But you want to know what else that Schliemann brought back from Troy?
So did it have something to do with aliens? Blue balls? I remember blue balls were pretty important in the last episode.
The swastika.
I feel like that's historically important. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on why, but I feel like that's historically important for some reason.
Well, let's read from this Smithsonian article and maybe we'll get a better understanding. So at least 800 variations of the symbol were found on pottery and sculptures throughout the layers of the city. The swastika is a symbol that is found elsewhere throughout history, from symbols of good fortune to even American military uniforms, Coca-Cola products, and Boy and Girl Scouts uniforms.
And if I recall correctly, the not good version of that was mirrored or flipped.
I'm not 100% sure on that. I would have to do a little bit more digging on the actual symbol itself. But as the symbol rose in fame, the swastika became a symbol tied to national identity from Britain and eventually, guess where? Germany. British linguist Archibald Sayce, S-A-Y-C-E, it's the most British name ever, stated that Schliemann's discovery of Troy was of double interest, stating that they carry us back to a later Stone Age of the Aryan race.
Cool.
Initially, Aryan was a term for the Indo-European language group, not a racial classification. However, with the rising interest in eugenics, European nationalists used the term as a descriptor for the ancient master race, with a clear through line to Germany. There's a whole thing with this whole idea that the people of Atlantis were actually the Aryans, and after the city was destroyed, they dispersed throughout the world in places like Tibet and Germany. It's a whole thing. It's all fake. It doesn't. Yeah. The swastika would be then used by the paramilitary group, the Freikorps, essentially like Weimar Germany era-esque Proud Boys, as a part of their newly discovered identity as the master race.
So how do Kellogg's cereal play into this?
That's a good question. Well, Kellogg's was a eugenicist, so...
You know, I had forgotten about that. I did not mean to make that connection there, but here we go.
So As Hitler's influence grew, he adopted the symbol as part of the Nazi Party logo in 1920. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, issued a decree in May 19th of 1933 that prevented the unauthorized commercial use of the swastika. Leni Riefenstahl would predominantly use the symbol in his propaganda film Triumph of the Will. Watched it, it's garbage. After Hitler did the only good thing he ever did in history and ate his own gun, neo-Nazis and white supremacists have continued to use the symbol. So we have Schliemann to thank for the swastika coming to Europe.
Cool. Of all the things that could have been made popular.
So I have no good way to segue this, but we're going to talk about the Anunnaki now.
Well, in an attempt to have some sort of clumsy segue, I'm realizing that that Aquaman and the Little Mermaid might be Aryans, which starts with an A, which I assume Anunnaki starts with an A. So let's talk about that.
The earliest civilization we have, 3800 BC, the Sumerians actually give us visual descriptions of these beings and speak of this time that they lived amongst their living gods. They called their gods the Anunnaki, and that term simply meant those who from heaven come to earth.
Mythology is chock full of these episodes of gods coming down to earth. I mean, because mythology is so interested in the relationship between gods and humans, there is necessarily going to be a lot of communication and communion between the two of them.
Yes, very interested in the relationship between gods and humans, like all those times that Zeus, you know what, it's not important.
So let's focus on that translation that Jason Martell so brilliantly gave us, those from which the heavens come. That translation is just wrong. Like, it's super wrong. Like, it actually is demonstrably wrong. The Anunnaki are believed to be the offspring of An, the Sumerian god of the sky and the word for heaven, and Ki, the earth goddess. The name means princely offspring or offspring of An. So where does this translation come from that Jason Martell said? Well, it comes from a guy named Zachariah Sitchin. And hold on to your butts, because this guy is fucking weird. Born in Russia and raised in Palestine, he graduated from the University of London with a degree in economic history. You might notice that has nothing to do with translating ancient Sumerian tablets. Sitchin has written a number of books to include The 12th Planet in 1976 and The Cosmic Code in 1998. Sitchin believed that the Anunnaki were a race of aliens from the planet Nibiru, a fictional planet that is said to lie beyond the orbit of Pluto. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki came to Earth 450,000 years ago and created humans by genetically altering female apes. But apparently he knows what he's talking about, and not two former fellows from the British School of Archaeology in Iraq.
I feel like you had a book open with a Scientology book right next to it, and you accidentally read over to the wrong book.
Right? Like, I'm just waiting for this dude to ask me when have I eradicated my thetans?
I think, sorry to correct you before the comments too, but it's midi-chlorians.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I wrong?
The Jedi never told you about thetans.
Is it possible to learn this power? Not through a Jedi.
I need you to hold on to these two soup cans, and we're going to read your level.
This next clip illustrates one of my many frustrations with the show.
Mount Olympus, Greece's highest mountain. According to ancient myths, this site was the home of the gods. It was here on Mount Olympus that Zeus sat on his throne and determined the fate of mortal men.
Whenever we have references to Mount Olympus, it is described to be this magnificent palace on top of Mount Olympus, allegedly, and the temple walls were always gleaming of gold or gleaming with silver, and a lot of little lights that they described as jewels. Well, if you look at that from a modern perspective, what if that place, Mount Olympus, wasn't necessarily the top of a mountain, but it was in fact a spaceship? Because it is described how sometimes there was a big rumbling with Mount Olympus and the entire top lifted off.
Okay, so I have two notes. The first note is that I'm feeling like in some of these cases, like when they're talking about describing Zeus on his throne and there are these little lights, it feels like it's being described in the vaguest way possible so as to lend more to their theory.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You're right in the first note.
It's kind of like I've seen these on the internet of comparing two movies, and you strip them down to the very base levels of what the movie is about in order to say these two movies are exactly the same. Obviously, they're two different movies, but if you boil them down to a certain point, then they're the same with the same plot and things like that. It feels like that similar type of thing of taking this description, boiling it down just enough so you're not specifically describing the types of lights, you're just saying there are lights, and what if they were spacecraft lights, if that makes sense.
Yeah, dude, you have no idea how much they're gonna do that later. So get ready for that.
Oh, I'm slowly preparing myself as we go through these. My second note being of all of the places in this show so far to put the word allegedly.
Okay, so that was actually a point I was going to make. First off, anyone trying to pass off what they're saying as historically accurate and then throws out the word allegedly, yeah, go ahead and just infer that they're full of shit. And second, I tried to find a source for this whole like the peak of Mount Olympus lifts off thing, and I absolutely can't find a damn thing. Like, I would think people would be able to find evidence of this because, you can actually hike up the peak of Mount Olympus. Seriously, just Google Mount Olympus hiking and you'll find various people who've done it. Hell, according to internationalliving.com, a beginning hiker could make the trip in an overnighter. The only issue of it would be the last leg of the trail. And it kind of makes me want to go hike Mount Olympus now when COVID ends.
The last leg of the trail where you then get yeeted into space.
Like a freaking Skyrim character when you meet a giant.
The Skyrim giant space program.
Yeah. But we'll talk about giants at some point. But my final point I want to wrap up with this clip is whenever they talk about looking at cultures from a quote modern perspective, what this does is it divorces these cultures and the people from their own context and transposes it onto ours, which is wrong. When we look at cultures throughout time and throughout the world, we should understand these cultures in their own context because they built their world both physically and conceptually in a different place than us. And so when we impose our context onto these societies, we rob them of the agency that they have. And we also rob them of what they could possibly teach us.
It sounds a lot like I've had an interest in Norse mythology and reading through Snorri Sturluson, who was one of the people who went around and gathered all of these poems and stories of Viking civilization and their mythology. And so we have them to thank for a lot of those stories that that we have now in regards to that religion. Even that was an issue because while reprinting the stories, they tried to make a case in a world that Christianity was beginning to spread more throughout, that these non-civilized people actually did believe in God and Jesus just in a different way, and so tried to interpret Norse mythology through the lens of Christianity. And I think that's kind of what we have here of kind of like you said, putting their theories onto this other civilization.
And you have something there because you're essentially interpreting a culture contrary to how that culture interpreted itself. So in this next clip, we finally get to the whole ancient alien gods using weapons shtick.
According to both the Iliad and the Odyssey, Zeus was often depicted as wielding a lightning bolt.
It appears to be a very powerful weapon because he could destroy whole cities with this thunderbolt weapon of his.
Similarly, Zeus's brother Poseidon, the god of the sea, was armed with a trident.
He was able to create tsunamis, tidal waves with this weapon. The trident weapon of Poseidon seems to have been something more than just a pitchfork.
So is it possible that the lightning bolt and the trident is some type of a direct energy device?
Are pitchforks not able to create tsunamis? I just kind of always assumed that they did.
No. Oddly enough, no, they're not.
Oh, okay.
Also, my man Hades not getting any love with his bident. Come on, y'all.
I'm sorry, what now?
In the three, like the big three brothers of ancient Greek mythology, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Hades got a bident, which is like a trident, but 2 instead of 3.
Okay, gotcha. So it was kind of what I was imagining.
Yes, exactly. So this is where we get to play my favorite game again. Was this a plot to Stargate?
America's game.
So there was a mythological weapon they used as a plot point in the show. In this case, it was Thor's hammer, of which the episode is named for. And we'll talk about Thor and the other Norse gods later on in the episode. But for now, in the SG-1 episode, Thor's hammer, the SG-1 team goes to the planet Samaria in search for allies against their dastardly enemies, the Goa'uld. The Goa'uld are these little parasitic snake monsters that attach themselves to human hosts and control their minds. It's a whole thing. On the planet, they discover an alien race known as a Unas, who are theorized to be the first hosts of the Goa'uld. Teal'c, who's a Jaffa who carries a baby Goa'uld in his stomach to stay alive, it's complicated, is trapped in a maze where the only exit is through Thor's hammer, which kills the Goa'uld but preserves the host. Daniel Jackson, the best character in the show and resident archaeologist, destroys the device to save his friend, but don't worry, thanks to Thor, who's actually one of those tiny gray aliens, gives them a new one. And again, it's complicated. Go watch the show, it's good.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that makes sense in context because I got lost there.
Yes, yeah. No, trust me, a Stargate fan is like going, he mentioned the episode! And, you know, they're going to go buck wild. This is for the 1% of the audience who has watched SG-1 as religiously as I have.
Yeah, no, I'm just over here listening to all this like, all right, so there are snake face huggers that go inside of people, and Jafar from Aladdin is there for some reason.
But you want to know what else is complicated?
I mean, I'm assuming that you're going to tell me, otherwise this is going to be a short episode.
Well, this show, as this clip will illuminate.
Centuries later, when Rome ruled over Europe and the Mediterranean, from the 1st century BC until the 7th century AD, the Romans paid homage to gods similar to the Greeks. Zeus was now known as Jupiter. Poseidon was called Neptune. But Apollo was known to both the Romans and the Greeks. Coincidence? Or, as most ancient astronaut theorists believe, was it the historical account of powerful beings that came to Earth thousands of years ago?
We know that the extraterrestrials more than likely are the source of what they call gods. How did they get here? More than likely in some type of craft.
Okay, I mean, sure. I just want to be clear with where that left off, are they trying to imply that naming them after the planets implied where they were coming from? I don't really know what to make of that.
Yeah, that's the problem with the show, is that they don't explain themselves in any concrete way, so you can just gather whatever the hell you want out of it.
I mean, the rest of us understand that the reason why the gods' names changed was because there was that huge PR scandal in the year 500 of our Lord and Savior, and so they had to completely reinvent their image. And it had nothing to do with whatever they're talking about. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. So I had the question of why did Apollo keep his name too? So I decided to look for answers in the Encyclopedia of Greek and Roman Mythology by Luke and Monica Roman.
But does that book have anything to do with spaceships?
No, but it did say that Rome, oddly enough, had their own gods and rights. And for example, the god of Jupiter and the goddess Juno enjoyed their own following and independent existence. To state that they were like the god Jupiter is analogous to the Greek Zeus is kind of anachronistic. It's not necessarily true.
I know I've heard some discussions of gods between pantheons kind of being meshed together in a way, like they had their own, like they were their own thing, but then being pulled into that current religion, their attributes were kind of meshed together as a way of saying, oh, yeah, the god that you're worshiping is totally the same god that we worship.
Well, not actually true. In Rome, the way they expanded, besides committing several genocides, is they would allow the various populations they were conquering to keep their gods and would just fold those gods into the pantheon that they worship. The only caveat to that is that you had to also pay your tithe to the Roman gods, because for ancient Rome, church and state were not separate. They were the same thing. If you ask the ancient Roman about the separation of church and state, they look at you funny and go, what the hell are you talking about?
I cannot imagine a single way that that could possibly go wrong.
Absolutely not. Like maybe a dictator would become the head of the state religion. Julius Caesar, what's up? And even like the Romans had their own myths. Romulus and Remus, who are said to have built the city, like they have their own founding myth. However, the part where ancient Greece comes in is that Greek legends began to integrate themselves into Roman mythology. This could possibly explain why Apollo kept his name. But you want to know where else Apollo got around in? France, apparently. Listen to this.
On the northwest coast of France, just south of Brittany, lies one of the most important prehistoric sites in Europe. At the seaside village of Karnak, over 3,000 megalithic stones are placed in rows over 2 miles long. The Karnak stones were hewn from local rock formations and erected between 4,500 to 2,500 BC, at the end of the Stone Age. They are the largest collection of standing stones in the world.
Archaeologists are baffled by the many megaliths at Karnak here. It's clearly a massive construction project with blocks of granite weighing 50 to 100 to even up to 350 tons. Legends here say that giants built Karnak, but you have to wonder, what is the real purpose of these giant megaliths, and why would prehistoric people have moved all of these massive stones and placed them in the many alignments here at Karnak?
All right, I know that this is asking a lot, but why are these archaeologists so fascinated and curious about rocks? It seems like on this show and with stuff related to these things, kind of like in last episode when we were talking about the stone doorway and the stone faces, it's just, I feel like rocks are definitely important, but not in the way that they are actually important.
I mean, do you want the short answer, which is also the long answer?
So, do I want the answer? Is what I'm hearing.
Right, because like at Karnak, the place that they're talking about in northern France, some people have argued that it's like some sort of calendar for astronomical alignments, which like that makes sense.
I mean, as long as they weren't getting distracted by shooting stars and stuff, then I guess that could be a thing. Hopefully, that's a little bit more accurate.
Right. So this next clip, man, this is the part where we get into Apollo coming in.
The ancient Greek poet Pindar spoke of a mystical land called Hyperborea, far to the north, where the sun shined 24 hours a day. Legends claim that Apollo visited Hyperborea, traveling in his chariot of fire every 20 years.
Apollo would tell to the Greeks, okay, I've got to go see some other people. I've got to go and teach them. And they're like, well, where are you off to? And he's like, well, I'm actually going to a place that's beyond where the north wind comes. It's the land of the Hyperboreans.
Although mainstream archaeologists speculate that the Karnak stones are most likely tomb markers, ancient astronaut theorists believe these stones are intentionally laid out in a unique geometric formation.
Everyone's like, hey, Apollo, where are you going? And he's just like, oh, I'm just hanging out with my friends, the Hyperboreans, where it's always daytime, just going with the buds.
Yeah, like I didn't realize that Apollo was not only traveling through distance but also time, and apparently fantasy, because I didn't realize that we were also in fucking Conan the Barbarian lore.
Somewhere up in the distance, Arnold Schwarzenegger's talking about hearing the lamentations of the women while Apollo's flying by.
Or begging people to not do a war.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. That's as far as we're going to delve into that subject. But right now, we're going to talk about Pythagoras and math.
Although mainstream archaeologists speculate that the Karnak stones are most likely tomb markers, ancient astronaut theorists believe these stones are intentionally laid out in a unique geometric formation.
Many speculations existed since centuries, and only a few years ago in France they started to photograph this whole French Brittany by helicopters. And when they put the pictures together, of a sudden someone realized, hey, this is not coincidence. The distances of the lines are always the same, 2,860 meters, or exactly the half of 2,860 meters. The angles are always the same. It's Pythagorean triangles. It's all a gigantic geometrical pattern from Stone Age, which is impossible. Our Stone Age people had no idea of Pythagoras triangles. Pythagoras was about 420 BC.
Okay, once again, I have a couple of notes.
Mm-hmm.
First note, what I'm hearing is that these structures are an MLM because it's all triangles, man. Everything goes up to the top. School of Pythagoras, just one big MLM, just all a big triangle. Second, they spend time they spend time talking about, well, we noticed that there was this pattern, and there's no reason that, or there's no way that this can be a coincidence that they set up these structures in this specific way. They didn't even know about Pythagoras. They just, these non-technological people, so on and so forth. And it's like, yeah, they would have not been capable of lining things up because it looks nice. Or yes, obviously they set it up with an idea or meaning in mind. Thank you for pointing that out.
Like, to that point, like, don't they understand that like humans are like really good at basic math? Like the pyramids are just basic math. Like these megalithic structures, basic math. It's all just math.
I mean, not to get too weird in my own right, though I don't know if it's going to be as weird compared to some of the clips that we've listened to. But
We've set the bar pretty high.
I mean, I would imagine that even if you don't understand math, that through trial and error, you would find that something works, right?
Which, like humans, despite all of our best efforts, we're really good at.
Yeah, not even without understanding triangles or something like that, you could more than likely figure out how to. I haven't seen the structure that they're talking about, but I imagine that you'd be able to line something up evenly, which might make a triangle. I don't know if that's making assumptions.
No, you're correct. Like, all it would take is just some basic rope and pegs to line this up. Like,
Yeah, get the rope out and get ready for some pegging.
we are professionals and we are adults.
Once again, we are adults and professionals.
So this next clip is just fucking dumb, which is what I have it labeled as.
But were the Karnak stones a signpost for an ancient astronaut called Apollo as he flew his spacecraft high above the land?
If the Greek god Apollo was really some kind of ancient astronaut, it's possible that the stones here at Karnak were a directional finder pointing the way to the far north, to the Hyperborea of the ancient gods.
Editing note, I want you to leave in that pause as I just try and piece this together. So maybe they constructed this structure to point in the direction of traveling through time and space to a place where it's always daylight with these Hyperboreans. Did I get that right?
Hey, we've already established that ancient aliens already have like the best raves, so it's always going to have some sort of light attached to it.
You know what? That's fair. I will concede that point.
And also, like, you brought up the traveling through space and time. If he's in an alien spaceship, wouldn't he have like basic navigation equipment and the ability to make maps? Why would he need a giant signpost saying go here?
I mean, as we discussed in the last episode, they didn't have road maps except for ley lines, which connected cities and were basically road maps. The script says shrugs shoulders, so.
Yeah. So get this, Cody. Apparently, there are similarities between Greek and Norse mythology.
I mean, here's the thing. I in at least one area I could talk about that, but I don't know if you would want me to include that on the show. And I don't think it's what they're going to talk about.
Well, let's just listen to this next clip then.
There are a number of similarities between Greek mythology and Norse mythology, and many of the gods are almost identical, and they do much the same thing.
Descriptions of the Viking god Odin, the god of war, death, and knowledge, and the Greek god Zeus bear striking similarities.
Zeus and Odin are both sky father gods. They travel through the skies in chariots because they are akin to the solar divinities. The precursor to many religious beliefs is sun worship. The ancients knew that life came from the sun. So that is a great mystery and a source of great awe.
Sky Daddy!
Well, it's like what you were saying earlier. They're boiling these beings down to such a base level to where they're not even the same beings anymore.
The one part of that clip that made me happy was Sky Daddy, and after that I got sad.
Yeah, it's just those things of like, that's why when during that clip I was like, no, they're not the same. Like, they had very different roles in the societies that they were in, right?
And that's the part that was kind of making me sad. I mean, I would, if I were to make this statement, I would say this is general knowledge, though I understand that not as many people have, looked into this kind of stuff. But it's not that difficult to conceive that different cultures would have gods that are somewhat similar or similar things that they worship. Like, yes, a lot of religions have a god of the sun in some way. That makes sense because there's this big bright thing in the sky that gives life and helps things grow. It's boiling down to a point where it's like, ah, yes, they're both very similar. They're the god of this and that, and they both have one eye. And also, like at some point, if you really look into it, then they're they're pretty different.
Yeah, and part of that also, and I'm reading this book, The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wingrow. And one of the points they make is that something as simple as food, or what you eat every day, tells something about your culture. And in the same way, gods are a reflection of that culture, like where you live, what's your environment, what things do you value. Those are reflected in your religion.
Again, as someone who has looked into or had a fascination with Norse mythology, I would argue that there's a huge cultural difference between the Norse and the Greek. I mean, you may have Spartans that were really into war and stuff like that, but I would assume that if you were to put general Greek or Roman culture next to the things that Vikings found important and sort of reflected in their gods, that they're two very different classes of ideology, if that makes any sense.
Right.
I mean, especially with pantheons, because generally, at least from what I've sort of observed with pantheons, is that the gods aren't perfect beings. They have their own flaws, and even those flaws can reflect what that culture believes. So, looking at that is definitely, like you said, a great way to see what that culture ultimately believes or is about. You could definitely, again, going back to boiling it down to a point where they're similar. I mean, Zeus throws lightning, Odin has a spear that never misses, and they both sit as the heads of their pantheons and are portrayed with, beards and are sort of the fathers of the gods in a way. But again, the more you describe of the two of them, the more disparate they become, or the farther apart they. It's kind of like if you took. It's kind of like if you took John Wick and Neo from The Matrix. Yeah, they're both played by Keanu Reeves, and they both use guns, and they both wear black. But then, as you describe more about them, they're two completely different people from two completely different worlds.
Right. One's trying to avenge his dog, and the other is a Jesus metaphor.
Right. And we're going to put a poll in the comments to see which one you guys think is which.
In the meantime, in this next clip, Giorgio here, I'm not sure if he's trying to convince himself or the audience. Have a listen.
Ancient alien theorists also point to similarities between the sophisticated weapons possessed by both the Norse and the Greek gods. Among Odin's weapons was a spear that never missed its target. The Norse god Thor, god of storms, strength, and fertility, wielded a powerful hammer.
Right there we have a correlation, a connection, because not only does Zeus have the thunderbolt, but what does Odin have and Thor? They have a hammer. Thor has a hammer with which he can smash things, destroy things, and, the hammer idea is pretty close with the description to the lightning rod that Zeus has.
So you have to wonder if these tales of Zeus's thunderbolts, Thor's hammer, if these weren't real weapons, just like we have today, where we have directed energy beam weapons or are developing some kind of literal thunderbolt coming out of a spacecraft.
That was a leap. How did we get here? We started off from him almost sounding like he's making it up as he goes, like, well, Zeus has a lightning bolt, and Thor has a hammer, and Odin has a spear, which means something. Hammer smash things, and then all of a sudden, super space weapons, like modern day.
I've watched a lot of footage from the whole Russia-Ukraine war that's going on. Gonna tell you, not a whole lot of direct energy weapons being used in that war. Whole lot of guns, though. Whole lot of just regular ass guns.
I feel like the lightning weapon would, not make the situation better. I'm going to make that assumption. Though, if it was the Soviet Union, they would still have plenty of hammers to smash things with.
I mean, it sure would help people do war crimes. So this next clip addresses some of the various close encounters. I can't do a sexy voice all that well.
Ancient myths are full of stories of gods descending to Earth to mate with humans.
According to many sources, including Norse mythology, Greek mythology, and even the Bible, we have the stories of these sons of God or actual gods from Mount Olympus or Valhalla, and they're coming to Earth. They find the daughters of men attractive.
When all these encounters happened, and when women slept with those gods, which can be found in multiple texts all around the planet, that those women actually had sex with extraterrestrials, not with gods, because gods do not exist.
Well, Georgie, I agree with something you said.
There's so much to it. As the show goes on, a peek behind the curtain. In the last episode, I felt like as we started getting further into some of the weirder clips, I felt like I had more to add. And I just have more and more to comment on with these clips. There is so much to unpack with that last one. First off, I like to think that Ancient Aliens is definitely a family show as they talk about aliens coming down as gods and just clapping cheeks with humans.
They come down, put on some David Bowie, and ask what every Marine mouthful of crayons has ever asked. Can I fuck it?
There are those important verses in the Bible of when Mary was visited by an angel that kicked down the door and said, "You remind me of the babe."
He breaks out his boombox and it's like, passion!
Just imagine David Bowie from Labyrinth kicking down the door of Mary from Jerusalem.
I still have yet to see that movie.
I highly suggest it, especially if you're into seeing copious amounts of David Bowie in tight pants.
I mean, I'm not against it.
What sane person would be against that? Moving on. The other part to unpack, moving on from the uncomfortable topic of David Bowie in tight pants and moving on to back to aliens clapping cheeks.
Uncomfortable? So,
I don't know. I have no idea if they explain in any more detail what they imagine these alien gods coming down and having sex was supposed to be like. I assume they don't, but doesn't that I have so many questions. I feel like that assumes a lot about alien anatomy.
It does, doesn't it? Like, generally speaking, we're carbon-based life forms, and if another carbon-based life form came to Earth, we can kind of generally make inferences based on what their anatomy might be like, right? Like, it won't be one-to-one, but we could kind of make an educated guess.
Right. I've heard a lot of discussions about theories on what life would look like on other planets and how it's very difficult because to imagine those things, because what we have to go by is what our ecosystem is able to produce, the sort of genetic laws that life here has been produced by, and the conditions of another planet that aren't the same as ours could produce something different. It might not look exactly the same. Maybe a living organism on another planet might just be a bacteria of some sort, or it might not follow the same rules of X amount of limbs or things like that.
Right. And we can't say definitively about anything because we haven't found anything.
Right. We could be completely proven wrong.
Here's the worst part about it. We probably have put more thought into it than the fucking show.
You're probably right. which is any, it turns out.
Right. And adding to the suffering, we have to hear the most boring person I've ever had to listen to on this show.
It is a tradition in many civilizations that there were certain human children who were somehow not human, but somehow had a connection to the stars, to a realm beyond Earth. And this specialness seems to be there from birth, and it somehow seems to involve a DNA component, which maybe science needs to look at and needs to study.
Some of the oldest accounts of gods and humans interbreeding can be found in ancient Hindu texts.
In the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, we find this account. A queen named Kunti mated with a celestial being, an extraterrestrial, who was known as the sun god. The product of this mating was Karna, one of the heroes of the Indian epic, the Mahabharata.
I'm glad we got some representation for, other religions, but I mean, admittedly, if you ever listen to someone just telling a story and trying to make it sound interesting, so we got this, I was talking to the neighbor the other day, and we were talking about, I gotta get my shingles on the roof retiled, and I was joking around about it with him and stuff, and we were talking about how other religions have sun gods, and in this Hindu religion, there's this goddess named Kunti who mates with a sun god. So see, there's a connection there. I don't
know about you, but I almost fell asleep with that second guy.
Again, I know I'm asking a lot here, but maybe these science-y archaeology guys can have a little bit more energy when talking.
Unfortunately, he does, because he's going to talk about more shit.
Oh, good.
These types of accounts in the ancient wisdom traditions have a modern equivalent in accounts of alien terrestrial hybrids, which is part of the modern UFO alien abduction type of account. It's remarkable that we find in these modern reports exact equivalents in the ancient accounts. That suggests that we're dealing with realities here. We're not just dealing with imaginary stories.
Ancient astronaut theorists say the term star children is another way to describe the offspring of humans and ancient extraterrestrials. They claim that in the early traditions of nearly every major world religion, star children correlate to supernatural beings known as gods.
I'm honestly not even sure at this point if it's boring because he's boring, or if it's just not nearly the level of crazy that we've listened to at this point. I might have just built up a tolerance.
I'm pretty sure it's just him. But I'm sure modern UFO abductions have so much in common with Zeus coming down to Earth, turning into a swan and fucking someone.
Or turning into a bull, or turning into money that appears out of nowhere to get a girl out of a pit that she was thrown into specifically so that she can become pregnant for some reason, and then by touching said gold she became pregnant. Greek mythology is weird, man.
So hold on to that thought as I play this next clip for you.
They claim that in the early traditions of nearly every major world religion, star children correlate to supernatural beings known as gods.
Star child is an often used reference in ancient texts when a woman had a quote-unquote divine interaction with one of the gods, often resulting in a woman being pregnant without having slept with anyone. Is such a thing even possible? Yes, it is. Today, artificial insemination. That's what happens today. You no longer have to have sex in order to have babies. We have the exact same description thousands of years ago where women, without sleeping with anyone, all of a sudden became pregnant. And the question is, how is that possible?
By Bluetoothing the semen into them, apparently.
Yeah, no, that was another implication that came to mind earlier when we were talking about the anatomy issue. Is the only other way that I can imagine to get around that is artificial insemination, like they just mentioned. So they're saying, oh, they didn't sleep with anyone and they became pregnant, but apparently nobody noticed the giant spaceship. But nobody noticed the giant spaceship with little gray men like run.
But the way they describe it is like they're using Bluetooth or something.
Well, in this particular instance, it would be like a turkey baster, whatever made of rocks, because everything is rock-based technology on the show.
With their giant swinging cocks. So we go from Greece to the American Southwest and Nevada to talk about some giants. Because apparently with one consistent thing in this show is whiplash.
Lovelock, Nevada. In the early 1800s, local legends passed down by the Paiute Indians told of a race of giants who were exterminated by their tribe. It is said this was done by trapping the giants in a cave, shooting arrows at them, and then starting a large fire at the mouth of the cave. Evidence of the slaughter lay undisturbed until the early 20th century.
Lovelock Cave was first discovered by local ranchers who were looking for bat guano to use in their fields.
In need of fertilizer for their crops, the ranchers removed nearly 10 feet of guano-enriched soil from the surface of the cave.
And then they began finding human remains. They found up to 40 or 50 people inside this cave. One was allegedly 7 feet, 7 inches tall. They all had long, red hair and were literal giants.
Just because you say they were literal giants at the end doesn't convince me that they were literal giants.
So let's actually talk about this cave. It's actually a really interesting cave. We have evidence of human habitation going back 4,000 years, according to radiocarbon dating from the oldest artifacts. And those artifacts include these woven baskets of sagebrush and tool sandals. And we also have, interestingly enough, these duck decoys made from tool fibers. And see, that's interesting. Like, all that stuff there is interesting and merits a whole like episode and discussion about, but it's more interesting than fake fucking giants.
I mean, the way that they describe them makes me think of, and this might just be something I picked up from somewhere that isn't accurate. Being the anthropologist, I'll have you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but weren't a lot of Scandinavian cultures described as giants when they were first encountered?
I couldn't answer that with any sort of accuracy. So I will let a more experienced person answer that question, which is not me. See, unlike this fucking show, I don't go around speculating bullshit. I actually say I don't know, so I'm not going to say anything on the matter.
I just feel like there are other possible explanations other than literally giants.
So on that thought, I don't have it in my script for some reason, but I remember looking up a source that talked about the whole, like, there was a fire in the cave where they were defeating giants. Well, turns out that's actually a fabrication that was made not by the people who are indigenous to the area. The people who are indigenous to the area talk about like this intertribal warfare, and they cornered their enemies into this cave and they set it afire. Like, there was no mention of giants. That's a complete fabrication later on.
Right. So my instinct was correct on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have it in my script, but I do have it as like a source that I have. So in this next clip, we start talking about the giants in the museum.
Throughout the 19th century, many giant skeletons were allegedly discovered in the Midwest, also in parts of California and around Death Valley. And the skeletons here found at Lovelock are one of the few that were really excavated by an accredited university.
Archaeologists from the Nevada Historical Society and the University of California believe the cave was occupied from approximately 1500 BC until a few hundred years before white men appeared in the Nevada territory. 75 miles from the cave site, a local museum has preserved several skulls that some believe are recovered remains of the giants.
I just want to point out that we've come full circle from towards the beginning of the episode, talking about the giant space program, and I'm just going to assume that we're going to talk about how the giants are actually aliens or something from space.
We will. We will.
There may be a theme on the show.
Is something to do with aliens that may or may not be ancient.
Set up a point, it's aliens. Set up a point, it's aliens. Rinse and repeat for 18 seasons.
And Firefly only got one.
Ah, come on, man, that's still fresh.
So this is where the show starts building a tiny little conspiracy as a treat.
Oh, now it is.
Inside this cabinet here are 3 skulls from the Lovelock Caves. When you first see these skulls, they seem to be pretty much normal-looking skulls. However, it's when we really start to compare the jawbones with this modern dental impression of a normal adult male that we see that these jawbones are unusually large. And these are really the skulls of giant people who were perhaps 7, even 8 feet tall.
All right, I may have missed something. I feel like the important part there was they look a lot like regular skulls.
So you and thus the audience can't see this, but he literally grabs like what look like dentures and is like, "This is a jawbone," and then sets it next to the mandible of one of the skeletons in the museum. Like he didn't even like put a whole mandible next to it. He just took a freaking like lower denture and just put it there and is like, "See, they're bigger. Of course they're fucking bigger."
So is this an implication of you could easily 3D print a set of teeth that are larger and set it next to something and say, "Look, it's bigger"?
So the next clip is where the sort of Alex Jones level shit starts coming in.
Just so I can prepare. So where does Alex Jones level of stuff sit on the scale next to Project Camelot?
Oh, I would not be surprised if we saw any Project Camelot people in this show.
A special cameo by
Sweary Carey.
That's when we get to find out that JFK Jr. is actually an alien.
Oh god. You know, we might actually have to do Project Camelot at some point. I'm not looking forward to that one.
One of the odd things with these skulls is that they're not actually put on display here at the museum, and they're kept hidden in this cabinet. Now, we don't know if that's really just out of respect for the Native Americans, or whether there's really something unusual about these giant skulls that they don't want them to display.
Are the Nevada bones evidence of a race of giants that existed all through early human history?
I'm hearing a lot of the same talking points from that documentary that you made me watch. That documentary about giants.
Yeah, we will have to do an episode about that show about that documentary, quote unquote, at a certain point.
going on right now. It's not very big, but it's going to keep getting bigger the way things are going.
So let's talk about Native American artifacts in museums, because I actually worked at a museum with Native American artifacts, and one of the governing laws in the United States that covers Native American artifacts is NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And at least at the museum where I worked at, we took that very seriously. We had artifacts in our collection from various tribes that allowed us to either display the artifact or to just keep it and take care of it, because there are some tribes that don't have the ability to house and take care of their own artifacts, mostly due to colonialism. And if I had to make an educated guess, that's what's going on here. Not they're trying to hide the existence of non-existent giants.
Also, maybe there's not enough to display, or not enough, try and display it as an exhibit.
I mean, I've seen exhibit windows with a lot less than just 3 skulls, and the thing about some of those skulls is that some of them are broken and some of them are incomplete and do require some level of care, which might be why they are not on open display. Also, museums tend to rotate their artifacts around. So if they're not displayed right now, that doesn't mean they won't be later.
Right.
So in this next clip, we see ancient aliens simping for the Bible again.
David and Goliath is one of those episodes in the Bible where you wonder what is going on. Is it just a metaphor, or are we dealing with a fundamental interpretation? And in that sense, Goliath has to be a giant creature. The question then is, he cannot be human. What is he?
Yeah, for such a secular show, this they sure do try hard to prove everything in the Bible, don't they?
I mean, like I said earlier, I was glad to see some representation from other pantheons, but they do certainly have a focus on that.
Yeah. So this next clip, the show basically posits the idea that the giants are the ones who built these giant stone structures like Stonehenge.
The most common megalithic construction known is the dolmen, believed to be burial chambers. They are found throughout Europe, the Middle East, South America, and Asia. Could these megastructures be the ruins of giants?
Archaeology likes to use the word dolmen, but they were formerly known in folklore as giants' graves.
A dolmen is shaped like the Greek letter pi with a top on it, and they're made of enormous blocks of limestone. And even today, we are marveled that anyone could construct those things and wonder how they got the top on top of the uprights. And those were built during the Middle Bronze period, which is roughly 2000 to 1500 before the Common Era. So seeing things like that, people question, those must have been made by giants. I mean, ordinary people could not have done that.
I mean, I guess it makes sense that only giants can make giant things, because humans can't make giant things.
Well, so that last guy, he was an actual PhD professor in archaeology. And what he was talking about is the perception of how these things were built, not how they were actually built. But the show twists his words to allow the show to suggest that giants built these structures instead of humans.
Okay, see, so based on a lot of the stuff that we've listened to up until this point, in the last episode, we talked a little bit about, they make the claim that there are all these cities that incorporate the name Star or something, and we talked about how that didn't seem super accurate, or towards the beginning of the episode with the lights around Zeus, and boiling it down in a way that makes it work for the narrative. And that's why I'm having this immediate reaction after the clip of, even when you seem to have someone who knows what they're talking about, it's being cut in a way that suits their narrative.
And that's something the show does a lot. It takes the words of actual physicists, chemists, archaeologists, anthropologists, and twist them around to fit the narrative that the show is trying to put out.
I mean, that also is just tragic in a way because you have these people who know what they're talking about, but if someone, say, realizes what this show is about and realizes the thing, have come to the conclusions that we've begun to come to even in episode 2 of this show, then it immediately discredits the experts that actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's like when someone appears on like InfoWars, even if you like agree with everything they say, the fact that you're on InfoWars makes you suspect.
Right.
So in this next clip, we get into one of the major tenets, another major tenet of ancient alien theory or thought.
One of the main tenets of ancient astronaut theory suggests that a long time ago, extraterrestrials changed our genetic makeup through a targeted mutation of our genes, essentially in the lab. So they took a couple of human beings, altered their DNA, then reinserted those people back into the population, so through procreation, those people would pass on those new genetic alterations to the entire population.
Ancient astronaut theorists suggest the evidence points to one conclusion: that aliens changed the genetics of early human DNA.
And made them into lizard people.
And like, I don't know if I need to say this at all, but like, that's not how evolution works. And an alien would be smart enough to know that if they were able to get here, to know that like, even if they genetically altered like a person, that would not guarantee anything over a long enough lifetime.
But we've also concluded that that much thought hasn't been put into the theory.
That is fair. So in this next clip, they get even more wrong about human evolution.
Homo sapiens have been around for 300,000 years, and only in a few thousand years, our brain size essentially tripled. Now, that does not jive with ordinary evolution. You need time, a very long time. However, today, biologists cannot quite put a finger on how our brain volume tripled in a very short time period. That is still a mystery.
I mean, in the previous clip, they were talking about some conspiracy level weirdness of genetically manipulating a few humans and then releasing them into the populace. And it didn't go in the weird direction that I was expecting it to go, but it's still weird.
So like, this is not new to any like biological anthropologist, but our evolutionary timeline did not start with Homo sapiens. It started with the whole of the genus Homo, like Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and if I can't even pronounce that right, we did not start developing as Homo sapiens. We started developing long before that. And also, not for nothing, apes, which we are, have a large brain compared to the body size. That's what makes us unique in the evolutionary timeline.
Right, and with that come disadvantages, like because of having a larger brain, unlike most animals, it takes time for humans to develop and be able to, they don't just, start running immediately out of once they hit the ground.
Yeah, no, like that's one of the things is like our brains consume a lot of our energy because we're social creatures. And part of human evolution is raising your young to be able to be social creatures.
And kind of going back to what they were saying about the timeline of that development. So I've heard this in discussions about evolution. Obviously, it's not as though there was if you're looking at the complexity of the human eye. It's not as though there was a further back ancestor that was just an ape with half an eye running around waiting for the next generation to just magically develop that eye. There are stages of evolution and passing down particular mutations or genes that are beneficial to that happening, and it may not. It's possible that that time frame does seem short if you don't consider the amount of development that happened before that point to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Which, like, the show does not get into at all whatsoever.
Well, no, we got a timetable to keep, man. We got to keep this show on the road.
Exactly. So you might be asking yourself, Brandon, why did they even make humans at all?
Brandon, why did they make humans at all?
Well, apparently it was to make a zoo.
There are actually accounts in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India of how, in their original attempts to produce living things in the universe, the gods or the extraterrestrial beings made mistakes and produced different types of monsters and giants and things like that.
Why should the so-called gods first make such mixed creatures? What's the purpose of it? They observe a lion and they say to themselves, why don't we mix the strongness of the muscle of the one animal with the heat expellent skin of the other animal to use it at some other planet, which is different to Earth? So they start to make breedings. They start to make mixed creatures.
I don't necessarily. I could be misreading some things or jumping ahead, but I just do not like where this is going.
When we talk about Eric von Daniken, we will talk about some of those problems you might be having, because I think I know where you're going with that.
Remember earlier when I said this went in I was expecting it to go in a weird direction, and I was surprised that it didn't go in that weird direction. I think we're starting to go in that weird direction.
But apparently it takes another weird direction to say that these aliens walk among us.
It's very possible that if there was some type of genetic intervention by an extraterrestrial race on humanity, they would be very interested to see their experiment progress.
I'm often asked the question, is it not ridiculous to believe that extraterrestrials should, in a way or other, look similar to us or even think similar to us? No. The question is wrong. They are not by coincidence similar to us, but we are similar to them because we are the product.
But if alien beings did interbreed with humans, why? Was it to save their own species? Or perhaps hide the genetic traces of their presence here on Earth? Could there even be aliens living among us?
Aliens are not similar to us. We are similar to aliens because aliens are gods, and God made humans in their image.
And then God created dinosaurs, and then man kills dinosaur, women kills man, women rule the earth.
I'll give you a B+ on that quote. You got the gist of it.
Also, I think red is sus. Don't you?
There may be aliens walking amongst us, and then there's the one guy at the end that's just real shifty-eyed.
Just
that gray bald dude at the end with the big black eyes. Have a weird feeling about them.
Out my knee.
I am just sitting here being human.
Listening to your human music.
I love this Joe Rogan.
So, what did we learn today? Giants aren't real. Turns out Troy gave us much more than Brad Pitt's washboard cum gutters. And aliens perform the immaculate conception through fucking Bluetooth. And apparently dentures are jawbones.
I see absolutely no problems here.
So, we're in episode 2. How are you feeling, Cody?
I'm just gonna keep reiterating what I said after that last clip of I just don't like where this is going. I'm getting some weird vibes, man.
Trust me, there's a reason why I chose Ancient Aliens, because I'm like, there's just so much we can talk about and just so much like wrong with this show. So we have reached the conclusion of this episode. As always, like, comment, and leave a review, and subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. This has been the Modern Misfits podcast. My name is Brandon.
And I'm Cody.
And we'll see y'all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.